The first fake fine came on a Tuesday, and I knew it was fake the way a man who has spent his life around documents always knows, not by the accusation, but by the paper. The photo stapled to the citation showed a trash bin at the foot of a driveway. It was not my bin, and it was not my driveway. You could see the number on the house reflected backward in a car window behind it. 4418. I live at 4402. My name is Edwin Fallon. I'm 66, a widower of 7 months, and for 34 years I was the records archivist for the district court in El Paso County, Colorado. That means I spent my working life as the person who kept the official memory of a courthouse, who indexed the filings, sealed the exhibits, certified the transcripts, and, above all, protected the chain of custody, that unbroken thread that lets you swear a document is what it claims to be and hasn't been touched since. It is the least glamorous job in any courthouse. It is also the one that decides whether the truth survives contact with the people who'd prefer it didn't. I retired to Sentinel Ridge, a beige subdivision under the red rock of the Front Range with a view of Pikes Peak and a covenants and restrictions document thick as a hymnal, because after Carol died I wanted quiet and a garden, and to spend my afternoons volunteering at the County Historical Society's archive, putting other people's memories in acid-free folders. I did not want a fight. I want that on the record, since I'm the one keeping it. The fine was $100, compounding, for a refuse container placed curbside outside approved hours. I walked it over to the HOA office, which is a converted model home at the front of the development, and I met, for the first time properly, the new man in charge. Darrell Kane was 58, broad, with the flat, patient stare of a man who has spent a long time watching people decide whether to lie to him. He'd been a police sergeant for 28 years in a department 2 counties over, retired with the pension and the bearing, and, I would learn, the deep, unexamined belief that the world is divided into people who give instructions and people who follow them. He was the new community association manager and, as of the spring election, president of the board. He had run, essentially, unopposed. Most people at Sentinel Ridge had no idea a board election had even happened. I laid the citation on his desk and pointed to the reflected house number. This is 4418. I'm 4402. Whatever this is, it isn't me. Darrell looked at it for about a second and a half. Cameras don't lie, Mr. Fallon. The camera isn't lying. It photographed 4418. Someone attached it to my citation. You're welcome to appeal to the Architectural Committee. He slid the citation back toward me. I'd pay it in the meantime. These things compound, and they get complicated when they go to a lien. You don't want the complication. He said the word complication the way a certain kind of man says it, softly, so you'll understand it's a favor and a threat, and that he doesn't distinguish between the two. Here's the thing Darrell Kane did not know about me, because he'd never had to think about men like me. My whole career was built on the principle that the record is the truth, and everyone else is just testimony. When somebody hands me a document that doesn't match what I know, I don't argue with the person. I go to the paper. So I went home, and I did what 34 years had made automatic. I photographed the citation and its metadata. I pulled up the community's governing documents and found the rule the fine cited: approved refuse hours. And I noted that I had no memory of that rule ever being adopted. And I requested, in writing, the minutes of the meeting at which it supposedly had been. I also did one more thing, and it's the thing that ended Darrell Kane, though neither of us knew it yet. For the 8 months I'd lived at Sentinel Ridge, I had attended every open board meeting, sat in the back, and, out of nothing but an archivist's reflex, the same reflex that makes me save the draft as well as the final, recorded the audio on my phone. Every meeting. I never listened to them again. I just couldn't make myself not keep them. It is the most boring habit in Colorado. It was about to become the only honest witness in the building. The minutes arrived by email 3 days later, a PDF, official-looking, with the approved refuse hours rule right there in the March meeting, moved and seconded and passed. I opened the file's properties. It had been created 11 days ago, not in March. 11 days ago, 4 days after my citation. Someone had written the March minutes in May, backdated them, and inserted a rule to justify a fine they'd already issued. And the author field, which most people never think to check, listed the account that had last modified the document. D. Kane. I pulled up my own audio from that March meeting and listened to the whole thing, 91 minutes, with a legal pad. There was no motion about refuse hours. There was no discussion of refuse hours. The word refuse was not spoken once. There hadn't even been a quorum that night. I'd noted it at the time because the archivist in me flinches at a meeting conducting business without one. So now I knew 3 things. The fine was fake. The rule was fake. And the official minutes, the community's sworn memory of its own decisions, had been forged, after the fact, by the man who ran the community. I want to tell you I was calm. I was, mostly. But I sat at my kitchen table, where Carol's chair still is, and I felt the specific cold anger of a man who has spent his life protecting the integrity of records, looking at a record that had been casually, confidently falsified by someone who assumed no one would ever check. Darrell Kane had spent 28 years in a world where his word was the record. He had not adjusted to a world where someone else kept one. I went back, once more, the polite way. I sent Darrell a certified letter, I still believe in certified letters, laying out that the March minutes did not match the recording of the March meeting, that the cited rule had never been adopted, and requesting, as is my right as a member under Colorado's Common Interest Ownership Act, to inspect the association's records. I was careful. I was documented. I gave him the chance to say it was an error and fix it. He did not take the chance. He escalated because escalation was the only move he had ever needed.
The fines started coming like weather. My door was the wrong shade of tan. My xeriscaping had non-conforming gravel. My flag was up too many hours. A noise complaint appeared from a neighbor who, when I asked him, went red and said he'd never filed one. Each fine was $100, each one compounding, and each one referenced a rule I could not find adopted in any meeting I had a recording of. Darrell was building a paper wall around my house, brick by fabricated brick, and at the top of the wall was a lien, and behind the lien, foreclosure. That is the machine. I had seen it in the courthouse. An HOA can take your house over accumulated fines. People think it can't happen. It happens. And he worked the neighbors the way a cop works a neighborhood. He went door to door. He mentioned, gently, that Mr. Fallon at 4402 had been having a hard time since his wife passed, that he seemed agitated, maybe not all there, that he'd been harassing the board.
He was building a second record, a whisper record, the file you assemble on a person so that when they finally complain loudly enough, everyone already knows they're the problem. I recognized it because I had watched that exact technique put innocent people in bad positions for 3 decades. Darrell Kane wasn't improvising. He was running a playbook. Then Marion Talley knocked on my door. She was 71, sharp as a letter opener, and she had been the volunteer secretary of the Sentinel Ridge HOA for 9 years, until Darrell Kane arrived, accused her of sloppy record-keeping, and forced her off the board. "He told everyone my memory was going," she said, sitting very straight at my kitchen table, refusing coffee. "I kept the minutes by hand for 9 years. My memory is fine." She set a banker's box on the table. "These are my copies, the real ones, before he started rewriting them." She looked at me. He picked the wrong man to send a fake fine, you know.
Everyone says you used to run the court records. I did. And Marion Talley had just handed me 9 years of ground truth. Over the next 2 weeks, my kitchen table became something I hadn't built since I retired. A case. Marion's handwritten originals, my audio recordings, meeting by meeting, the forged PDFs with their impossible creation dates and their D. Kane author fields. And when I laid the forged minutes beside Marion's originals, beside my recordings, the pattern stood up out of the paper like a watermark held to light. It wasn't one fine. Over 18 months, Darrell Kane had rewritten the association's minutes at least a dozen times, inventing rules, backdating special assessments, and, in 3 separate meetings, recording unanimous approval of maintenance contracts that my audio proved were never even discussed. Because it was never about my $100. The fabricated rules always led to money. Fines that flowed to the association. Special assessments levied on all 200 homes by board votes that never happened. And fat maintenance and landscaping contracts, approved in forged minutes, awarded to the same 2 vendors over and over. That's when I called a lawyer, and that's when it stopped being an HOA squabble and became something with a longer sentence attached. Carmen Ortega practiced HOA governance law out of Denver and had the specific gleam of an attorney who has waited her whole career for exactly this file. "People think minutes are secretarial fluff," she said, turning pages. "They're not. Board minutes are the official legal record of a corporation's decisions. Contracts rely on them. Liens rely on them. Forging them to extract money isn't a covenant dispute, Mr. Fallon. It's fraud. And doing it across 200 homeowners through a management company across the wires, that's the kind of fraud that gets federal." She tapped Marion's box. "We inspect the records, we subpoena the vendors, and your recordings are the thing that makes it unarguable, because a forged document can lie about what a meeting decided, but it can't lie louder than a recording of the meeting deciding nothing. We needed one more thing, how the digital files had actually been changed. So I found Noah Stern, 29, the IT contractor who maintained the association's shared drive, a jittery, decent kid who'd assumed the weird after-hours edits were just Darrell being a control freak. When I explained what the edits were, he went pale and pulled the version histories and the access logs. There it was, in cold machine truth. The March minutes edited on May the 12th at 9:47 at night from Darrell Kane's account, 11 weeks after the meeting. A dozen documents, all showing the same fingerprint, created honestly by Marion or her successor, then altered weeks or months later by one account. The drive itself had kept the record of its own falsification, because that is what records do when no one thinks to stop them. Darrell found out we had the logs, and he did the thing that told me exactly who he was. He didn't fold. He came after Noah. He called in a favor with a friend still on the job and had someone lean on the kid about his contractor's license, muttered about unauthorized access to private systems, tried to make the one honest technician in the story look like the criminal. And he filed a complaint against me, with the sheriff's office where he still had friends, alleging I was harassing and threatening a community board. A young deputy actually came to my door about it. I gave him a folder, the certified letters, the citations, the metadata. He read it on my porch for 10 minutes, and his face changed, and he left without writing anything down. Then Discovery cracked the whole thing open, and the shape underneath was bigger than one bitter ex-cop. Carmen's subpoena went to Front Range Community Management, the firm that managed Sentinel Ridge and 40 other associations across the state, and their internal emails rearranged the entire story. Darrell Kane was not a rogue, he was a hire. Front Range had a model, spelled out in their own onboarding documents. Install former law enforcement personnel as managers and board presidents in
underperforming communities because, and a regional director wrote this in an actual email, residents comply faster with authority figures, then generate revenue, aggressive fines, manufactured special assessments, and management-favored vendor contracts all ratified through the minutes. The forged minutes weren't Daryl's private crime, they were the company's business model, and Daryl was just especially good at the enforcement half of it. And there was one more file, and I almost wish I hadn't found it, because it turned the whole thing from an accounting to a grief.
In Daryl's previous community, 2 years earlier, a homeowner named Walter Pruitt, a retired machinist, a widower like me, had been buried under exactly this machine. Fabricated violations, compounding fines, a special assessment he'd never voted on, a lien, letters, more and more frightening, on association letterhead, telling a frightened old man he could lose his house. Walter Pruitt had not lost his house. He had died in it, by his own hand, 11 days after the lien was recorded, and the file noted, in the cold shorthand of these things, that the association had written off the outstanding balance as uncollectible. I sat with that for a long time. I had thought I was fighting about $100 and my own front door. I was not. I was fighting a machine that had already killed a man like me, in a chair like mine, and had written it off as a bad debt. After that I stopped being angry, which is a thing that happens to you sometimes when the anger gets too big to hold. I just became very, very careful. The way you are careful with an exhibit that has to survive. The board, under Front Range's thumb, refused to remove Daryl. The fines stood. The lien on my house moved forward. So Carmen went to court, and the court did what the neighbors couldn't. It froze the fines and the lien and the special assessment pending trial, and it ordered a full inspection of the association's records. Every minute, every version, every log. But the real reckoning didn't happen in the courtroom. It happened at the annual members' meeting, in the clubhouse, in front of everyone, because I asked Carmen to let me do it there, where the community that had been told I was a crank could hear its own memory played back to it. I set up a laptop and a speaker. I put the approved March minutes on the screen, the ones with the refuse rule, the ones that had started all of it. And then I pressed play on my recording of that same March meeting, and I let the room listen to 90 seconds of their own board, in that same building, adjourning without ever once mentioning the rule that had been used to fine me and, it turned out, 11 other households. The minutes said one thing, the room had said another, and 200 people who had spent 18 months trusting the documents on the website heard, in their own board's voices, that the documents were lies. Then Noah put the version logs up. May the 12th, 9:47 at night, D. Kane. Over and over, document after document. And Marion Talley stood up, 71 and steady, and read 3 sentences from her handwritten originals and sat back down. And she did not need to say anything else. Daryl Kane did not break, and he did not apologize, because men like Daryl Kane experience being caught as an insult rather than a reckoning. In his deposition, he did not say he couldn't recall. He said, and Carmen let him talk, because a man explaining why his forgery was righteous is a man handing you the rope, that he had corrected the minutes to reflect the board's intent, that Marion's records were amateur, that he had brought order to a community that needed it. He defended every forged document as a public service. The young deputy he'd tried to use against me testified about being asked to have a word with a resident and an IT contractor. The regional director's email about authority figures was read into the record, and the machine, which had run so smoothly for so long on the assumption that no one keeps their own records, came apart on the one man in the community who had kept his. Here's how it landed, because I know that's what you want. The court voided every fabricated fine and assessment across Sentinel Ridge
and ordered restitution, the money handed back, homeowner by homeowner. The forged minutes were struck, and the true record reconstructed from Marion's originals and my recordings, and entered, corrected, as the association's official memory. The lien on my house evaporated as though it had never been, which, legally, it never had. Front Range Community Management's whole model went to the State Attorney General and, because the fraud crossed state lines through the wires and the vendor kickbacks, to the U.S. Attorney. The firm is under a consent decree now, its contracts across 40 communities being unwound, its regional director indicted. And Daryl Kane, who spent 28 years certain that his authority was the same thing as the truth, was convicted of forgery and criminal fraud. Not a long sentence, his kind rarely get one, but a conviction, a record of his own now, permanent and certified, and a lifetime bar from ever sitting on a community board again.
He is, at last, in the one place he spent his whole life avoiding, on the wrong side of a document he cannot edit. I did not push for more, though I could have, because there was something more important to fix, and only I knew how to fix it. I went back through the reconstructed minutes, and I did the thing an archivist exists to do. I found Walter Pruitt's file, in the records Front Range had tried to bury, and I saw that in his old association's official memory, he was still listed as a chronic violator, a problem resident, a bad debt. And I filed, through Carmen, to have that record corrected too, to strike the fabricated violations from his name and enter the truth, that Walter Pruitt had done nothing wrong, that the violations were forged, that the debt was a lie. His daughter wrote me a letter about it that I keep in the one folder in my house that isn't acid-free, because I take it out too often for that. Sentinel Ridge has real rules now, the boring kind that actually protect people. Every meeting is recorded, by the association itself, and the recording is the record. Minutes are versioned and open to inspection. There's an independent secretary. Marion Talley has her old job back, keeping the memory of the place by hand, the way she did for 9 years, and nobody says a word about her memory anymore. Noah has a contract to keep the version histories honest. It is all deeply, wonderfully dull. Dull is what safe looks like. Some evenings I take my coffee out to the porch and look at 4418 down the street, the house whose trash bin started all of this, photographed and pinned to my name by a man who assumed no one would check the reflection in the window. And I think about the whole machine that stood behind that lazy little forgery, and the man it had already killed, and how close it came to writing me off as another bad debt. Then I go back inside, to the shelf where I keep the reconstructed minutes now, bound and certified in my own hand, and I file the day's records the way I have filed records my whole life. Because I learned one thing in 34 years at that courthouse, and Daryl Kane learned it too late, in a deposition, defending forgeries as favors. The records don't lie, only the people who assume no one is keeping them. Here's what makes this one colder than most. Daryl Kane didn't forge a deed or drain a lake. He forged minutes, meeting minutes, the most boring document a community produces, and therefore the one nobody ever thinks to check. That was the whole genius of it, and the whole horror. He understood that an HOA runs on its own official memory, that fines, assessments, liens, and contracts all trace back to a record of what the board decided, and that if you control that memory, you can make the community approve things it never voted on, and it will believe it did. He wasn't rewriting the past for sport. He was minting money out of a record nobody guarded. And notice how Edwin beat him, because it wasn't cleverness, it was a habit. He recorded every board meeting for 8 months and never listened to a single one. That's not strategy. That's the reflex of a man who spent 34 years protecting chain of custody. But a forged document can lie about what a meeting decided. It cannot lie louder than a recording of that meeting deciding nothing. The metadata gave him the when,
a March record created in May, from one account, 11 weeks after the fact. The audio gave him the what? And 71-year-old Marion Talley's handwritten originals, 9 years of them, gave him the ground truth. 3 independent memories, all saying the same thing the official one didn't. The legal spine here is worth knowing because most people have it exactly backwards. Board minutes aren't secretarial fluff, they're the legal record of a corporation, and forging them to pull money out of 200 homeowners isn't a covenants dispute, it's fraud. And once it runs through a management company and across state lines, it turns federal. An HOA really can lien and foreclose over accumulated fines. That machine is real. A man named Walter Pruitt, 2 years and 1 community earlier, is what it costs when nobody keeps their own copy. So here's the question that sits under this one. When an authority hands you the official version, the minutes, the record, this is what was decided, do you have any way to check it? Or are you just trusting that the person who wrote it wouldn't? Because the whole thing turned on one man who kept his own records when everyone assumed no one would. The records don't lie. Only the people who bet that no one is keeping them.